Hello everyone, we have now another video in our series of videos, this time speaking about the official worship of the Catholic Church. Official worship, liturgical worship, public worship, it goes by different names. Some people never heard of it. Some Catholics don't know what it means. So this evening we will see the difference between public, official, liturgical worship and private worship or prayer. And we'll look at it quite briefly in three different parts. First, the purpose of the Catholic Church. Second, the official prayer itself. And finally, certain implications of the existence of this official prayer, official worship of the Church. First, what is the purpose of the Catholic Church? Well, it has more than one purpose, but the main one, the primary work of the Church is to praise God, to give worship to God, to offer prayer. And this is simply a continuation of that which was done by Jesus Christ himself. As man, our Lord worshipped the Father in heaven. As the mystical body of Jesus Christ, we do the same. We continue that work. Perhaps the easiest, most obvious example of this is the Holy Sacrifice of the Mass, which is the very same sacrifice, offering given by Jesus Christ, in a different form only, different mode, different manner. And the Church will continue to do that. So the Church has different functions, the first of which, the most important of which, is to worship God. It's not only the Church's main function, it's the main activity, or it should be, of any man. Secondly, what is this official worship of the Church? You can call it what you wish, prayer, worship. Well, we actually find certain official prayers given to us in an official way in different books, which are to be distinguished from all other prayers, which we might call private prayers. So the official liturgical public prayers of the Church are found in a certain number of books. We call them the liturgical books. The main ones we'll speak of this evening. You know them already, some of them at least. The first would be the Missal. Then we have the breviary. We have the ritual. We have the martyrology and the pontifical. We won't speak too much about the books that belong to the bishop. He, being quite different from a simple priest, has his own liturgical books, and we don't see them very often. We'll look more at the others, which we do see. Already you know quite well, no doubt, the Missal. The priest has an altar missal, and the faithful tend to have, for their own use, an adaptation of that for the laity, containing more or less what the priest has on the altar. And what is in the Missal? Well, we have the text of the Mass and also the rules governing the priest at Mass. For the priest at the altar is not free at all. There's very little, almost nothing that he can decide for himself. His movements, his words are all dictated by certain rules. It is official worship, and he doesn't determine it for himself, the Church does. Then there's the breviary, and that's the priest's prayer book. You no doubt have seen the priest saying his prayers in the chapel, and he says them from a book edited by the Church. I'll give you an example. Here's an older breviary. You see it's rather small. It would come in 4 different volumes divided by the seasons. Nowadays, it's much more common to have only 2 volumes. The year is split in 2. Anyway, the breviary contains the prayers which the priest must say, and this under the pain of sin. The priest is not required to offer Mass all that often unless he be required to do so for some reason. For example, if he should be the parish priest. Otherwise, the priest is not required to offer Mass every day or even often. And in fact, sometimes he's forbidden to do so. I mentioned this in a different video. If he's lacking a proper altar boy who can make the responses, at least in the past, he couldn't even celebrate Mass. But he is required, under the pain of sin, to say prayers throughout the day, and these prayers are found in the breviary. For the most part, they consist of the Psalms, the Psalter, and they are said throughout the day. The Church prays constantly, and these prayers are broken down into what we call hours. And that doesn't mean that each prayer lasts an hour, but they are said at certain hours of the day, at certain times, and that's why they're called the hours, the liturgical hours. And they begin more or less in the middle of the night, with 2 hours put together, matins and lauds. In monasteries, the monks might say these prayers, say at 3 o'clock in the morning. Then the first prayer of the day, prime, followed by terce, and then sext, none, vespers, and compline. And the very names of these hours indicate that they are said, or at least meant to be said at certain times. So prime would be the first hour of the day, roughly 6 o'clock. And then terce comes at the third hour of the day, 9. Sext means sixth hour. Noon. None is at 3, 9th hour, 3 in the afternoon, followed by vespers, meaning the dusk prayer, and compline wraps everything up in the evening. And all of these are contained in the breviary, and unless the priest be hindered for some legitimate reason, he is required to say all these prayers under the pain of sin. That's his duty. Next, the ritual. No doubt you've seen the ritual because you've asked for prayers, blessings, blessing of this or that, and all of these blessings are found in the ritual. They're not made up by the priest himself. The Roman ritual, here I have a copy. It's about the same size as that breviary I showed you. It's a Roman ritual. It looks small, but it's rather dense, and it contains all sorts of things. It contains not only blessings, but the sacraments other than Mass and the rules for celebrating them. On top of that, it contains litanies, processions, the way one conducts burials, exorcisms, and all sorts of things. And within it, one finds blessings which are reserved to bishops, and those which can be given by a simple priest. The Martyrology. That is a book of the martyrs. The martyrs, because originally it was the martyrs who were in it. Nowadays, and for a long time now, it's not only the martyrs, but the other saints, the confessors, the virgins, and so forth. And it's a book, a list of the saints, which is read within the office of prime in the morning, announcing the birthday of the saints, those whose birthday it is. But what does that mean? Well, for the Catholic Church, birthday means something very specific. It means the day one is born into heaven, the day on which one leaves this world to join the next. The real birth, the birth into eternal life. That's what birthday means for the Catholic Church. The natural birth of a man is counted for nothing. It was considered quite pagan, in fact, by the Catholic Church, with certain exceptions. I can think of 3, and I will let you think about them yourselves. In our liturgy on the Church's calendar, do we ever celebrate the natural birth of anybody? Well, we do, but that number is quite limited. Finally, I mentioned the Pontifical, that book which regulates the bishop's Mass. The bishop doesn't celebrate Mass like a simple priest. He may do so because of circumstances, and often you will see a bishop celebrating a Mass like any other priest with certain differences. But in normal times, he would celebrate Mass according to a different rite, a pontifical rite, surrounded by servers. And if those servers were not available, he would still have a low Mass specific to him. For example, he would be assisted by not only acolytes, but by 2 deacons or 2 priests. A bishop is not a simple priest. And there are other books that regulate the ceremonies conducted by bishops. We won't talk about them. We don't see them very often. What is this prayer of the Catholic Church, though, the official prayer? How is it different from other prayers we say? Well, the official, public, liturgical prayer of the Church is, by its very nature, the act of a society, a group. It's a corporate action, and this will imply certain things. The prayers are very specified, and they cannot be invented by the individual person. So, for example, the breviary, when said by a priest, is a public prayer, even if he be alone. It's not a question of numbers. It's a public prayer. The words are dictated by the Church. And if the priest is in his room saying his breviary, it's a public prayer. We have other prayers which are not public. The most obvious of which, perhaps, is the Rosary. It's not it's not an official liturgical prayer of the Church. And yet we say it quite often in common, in public. Doesn't make it an official prayer. For example, if there should be a pilgrimage, a procession, and you have 1,000 priests all walking together, saying in unison the Rosary, that Rosary is not a public official prayer of the Church. It's said together, but it is a private prayer said in public. Another prayer you see quite often, I think, is the benediction of the Blessed Sacrament. We always do it in a public manner, that is, with a certain number of people present, and yet it is a private prayer. It's regulated by the Church, by the bishops, with very specific rules. It is a private prayer. There is a nuance to that. That is, there is a certain part of the benediction of the Blessed Sacrament which is official, and that is the tantum ergo. That is an official liturgical prayer of the Church, but the rest of the ceremony is private. And there are other private prayers which we say in common, for example, the Angelus, or in this season, the Regina Coeli, that sort of thing. There is a distinction, official, private prayer. It doesn't mean that the private prayer is not necessary. In fact, for most people and in most circumstances, it is very necessary, even for salvation. But it is not an official prayer. We see certain indications of the distinction, which you may have noticed yourselves. If you ever see in the chapel a priest who is reading a book and moving his lips, no doubt he is saying his breviary, and he is saying it aloud, although heard by himself alone. And he is saying it aloud because that is a requirement. It's symbolic. It is an official prayer of the Church, and thus he is meant to say it vocally, to vocalize the words, even if only he hear them. It's an official prayer. If you see the priest saying his prayers but not moving his lips, he's perhaps making a thanksgiving after Mass, or he's saying private prayers. That's one indication that he is saying an official prayer of the Church. We see also other indications. Perhaps you've noticed in the month of May, we have the benediction of the Blessed Sacrament. And at the benediction, at least in Paschaltide, there is the Paschal candle, but it's not lit. It's lit for Mass, it's lit for Vespers. It's not lit for the benediction of the Blessed Sacrament, because that practice, that prayer, is not an official prayer of the church. And the Paschal candle is lit only for official prayers of the church. But you may say, well, what about at Vespers? At Vespers, the Paschal candle is lit, and then afterwards it is lit for benediction of the Blessed Sacrament as well. Quite true. But that's a determination of the church. If benediction follows upon Vespers, the Paschal candle is not put out, simply because it would be a distraction, an interruption not warranted, so it's left burning. But if benediction were held alone, the Paschal candle would not be lit. You have some other subtle indications of the difference between official and private prayer. In the official prayer of the church, the priest will nod his head at certain points. For example, when he mentions the holy name, when he says Oremus, he does not do that in private prayer. For example, during the Angelus or the Regina Coeli, or even during benediction of the Blessed Sacrament. And you wonder, well, why did the priest bow his head at this time and not at the other time? Well, in the Tantum Ergo he will bow his head, but he won't at the other times because they are not official prayers of the church. Subtle things which you may have noticed. Lastly, what are some of the implications of this distinction, public, private, official, non-official prayer of the church? Official prayer means that the church regulates and determines the words in which the faith is expressed. The church will do the same thing for private prayers as well, thus the church will give editions of approved prayers. That doesn't make them official prayers to be offered in public. An official prayer, a liturgical prayer, will be, by its very nature, first of all, very important, more important than private prayers. And that should indicate to us a certain honor to be given to such prayers, a certain distinction. They are more important than any other prayers we should come up with on our own. The liturgical hours are more important than the Rosary of the Blessed Virgin Mary. Simple as that. The public prayer deserves more honor, and perhaps also our participation to the extent possible. We ought participate in these prayers when possible or reasonable. Father Rutledge mentioned in at least one of his conferences, Vespers. He was speaking of Hilaire Belloc on pilgrimage coming to a town in France and finding no one at home because the entire village was in the church, parish church, for Vespers on Sunday. And that is the way it was, at least in certain places in Catholic countries, for a very long time. Attendance at Sunday Vespers was more or less of obligation, and at least was considered so by the people. You simply didn't not go. And today, how many people have ever heard of Vespers? One does wonder. Many things, private prayers, private revelations, all sorts of things seem to be ranked by some people rather higher than the Catholic Church's official prayer. And there's something wrong with that. You know, there is a certain Protestant spirit that affects all of us, perhaps. A Protestant has no authority to give him prayers, none whatsoever. And thus a Protestant might not even put the Our Father above his own prayers, which he would make up. No, there's no authority to tell him how to pray. He says, oh, no, I'll pray as I see fit, and whatever pleases me best is what I will stick to. And this has nothing to do with the Catholic spirit. No, when the Church gives us certain forms which are pleasing to God without our own judgment being brought into question, no, we should pay particular attention to this. You might say, well, I don't know Vespers, I don't know how to participate in Compline and all the rest. That's understandable. It's all done in Latin, of course. Well, all you need to do is simply ask a priest, or perhaps one of the sisters, or a layman who participates regularly in these prayers, and in a short time you would learn how to participate yourself and to join in. In the Society of St. Pius X, whenever possible in our chapels, certain of the liturgical hours are set in common: prime, sext, and compline. So prime almost always at 6:30, sext at 12:15. Compline varies a little bit, but here, at least in St. Mary's, at 8:30. On certain days, feast days, in addition to these hours, we add Vespers, and especially on Sundays. So, if you have the opportunity, look into these official prayers of the Church, see why the Church ranks them so highly, gives to them a certain dignity, and decides that they are those prayers most pleasing to God and perhaps most helpful to man. Hope to see you at Vespers.